This investigation started on February 26th with the discovery of Mr. Hackman and Miss Arakawa and their dog at their residence. I just want to do a short recap.
Gene Hackman, though known for his reclusive nature in recent years, was never one to ignore visitors. He had been a fixture of Hollywood for decades, an iconic actor whose talent and charisma had earned him widespread admiration. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, while also a private person, was no stranger to the rhythms of daily life. She, too, would always respond when someone came to call. But today, neither of them answered. The workers knocked again, louder this time, their hands trembling slightly as their unease intensified. The morning of February 26, 2025, started like any other in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The city, nestled in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, had earned a reputation for its serene beauty, its quiet streets, and the sense of peace that settled over the adobe houses like a comforting blanket. The sun, rising above the jagged peaks, bathed the town in soft golden hues. The crisp air, tinged with the scent of pine, swept through the narrow streets, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the sidewalks. It was a quintessential morning in this small, artistic town, tranquil, untouched, and calm. Yet beneath the calm, something dark was about to unfold, and by the time the day was through, Santa Fe would be thrust into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. In the early hours of the morning, a group of maintenance workers arrived at the Santa Fe home of legendary actor Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. The visit was intended to be a routine one. The workers had been to the house countless times before, performing various tasks that required attention, and there was nothing unusual about the request for them to come again. But this morning, something felt off. The once bustling home, known for its quiet elegance and charm, seemed eerily still. The faint sounds of everyday life, the creaking of wooden floors, the rustling of curtains, the soft murmur of people going about their morning routines, were conspicuously absent. The workers exchanged uneasy glances as they approached the front door, sensing something was not quite right. They knocked at first, calling out in their usual manner, but there was no response. Silence greeted them, and, with each passing moment, their concerns grew. The chilling discovery. One of the workers, now visibly agitated, decided to take a step closer to a nearby window, hoping for some clue as to why the house was so still. As he peered inside, his heart sank. The sight before him was enough to freeze him in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat, and his face went pale. What he saw was enough to send a chill down his spine. Gene Hackman's lifeless form was lying motionless on the foyer floor, his signature cane and a pair of sunglasses resting near his side. It was as though he had been heading toward the door when something had suddenly stopped him. His body had fallen, but there was no sign of struggle, no sign of trauma. A few feet away, in the bathroom, lay Betsy Arakawa. She too was unresponsive, her body positioned near a portable heater. Her death seemed just as sudden, as though she had simply dropped where she had been standing. But the most disturbing detail of all was the third body, that of their beloved Australian Kelpie, Xena. The dog was found curled up in a closet, lifeless, and a deep sense of foreboding filled the room. How had this happened? What had occurred in this quiet home? Without wasting another moment, the worker rushed to call 911. The urgency in his voice was palpable, sending his colleagues into a frenzy as they scrambled to dial for help. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the grim scene inside, his body frozen with shock. What had happened here? And why had no one heard anything? Within minutes, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's deputies arrived. Their sirens cut through the morning stillness, an intrusion of noise into what had previously been a serene landscape. The deputies entered the home cautiously, their eyes scanning the area, taking in the unsettling silence. What greeted them was a picture of quiet tragedy. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had not been broken down. The windows were intact. The house itself was undisturbed. No overturned furniture, no shattered glass, no obvious signs of foul play. Everything appeared as it always had, except for the chilling reality that two beloved individuals and their dog were gone. The first responders checked the couple's bodies for signs of injury. There were none. No bruises, no cuts, no visible signs of violence. It was as if they had simply passed away in their sleep. Yet, the circumstances were so strange, so foreign to what anyone would expect from such an event, that the deputies couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. The strangeness of the scene. The scene was one of quiet confusion, with each new detail raising more questions than answers. There was nothing that made sense. How had both Gene Hackman, a man known for his impressive physical health and discipline, and his wife Betsy, who was not known to suffer from any particular illnesses, succumbed to death in such a bizarre and untimely manner? No one could say for certain, at least not yet. The house was eerily silent, but not empty. Two surviving dogs, Baron and Nikita, were found huddling together in a corner. The pair had been in the house the entire time, witnesses to whatever had unfolded. They were visibly shaken, their fur ruffled and eyes wide with terror. But they were alive. They had survived whatever had taken their beloved owners. The deputies gently coaxed the dogs outside, where they were placed in the care of animal services. For the authorities, the dogs would prove to be the only living connection to the events that had taken place within those walls. What had they witnessed? What had they felt? For now, there were no answers. As the news of the discovery spread, the shockwaves rippled through the Santa Fe community and beyond. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in hushed tones. How could this happen? What had happened to Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa? The news soon reached Hollywood, where colleagues, friends, and fans of the legendary actor were left to grapple with the loss of one of cinema's finest talents. The world could hardly believe that the man who had given so much to the silver screen had been taken so suddenly. His death, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding it, left a profound sense of sadness and confusion. The investigation begins. Authorities quickly announced that an investigation was underway. Autopsies would be conducted, toxicology reports ordered. But until those results came back, there was little more that could be done. Only speculation filled the air, and the growing sense of unease settled heavily on the small town. Santa Fe, a town known for its peace and quiet, had suddenly become the epicenter of a mystery that would grip the nation. The investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind the deaths. Detectives combed through the house, collecting everything they could: a planner, 2 cell phones, and a selection of medications, including Tylenol, a thyroid supplement, and Delame, a drug used to treat high blood pressure and heart conditions, were taken into evidence. In the bathroom where Betsy Arakawa had been found, an open prescription bottle lay on the floor, its contents spilled out, a small detail that raised more questions than it answered. Could Betsy's medications have played a role in her death? Did they contribute to a sudden medical emergency? But it was the condition of the bodies that truly puzzled investigators. Unlike Gene, whose body showed signs of having recently collapsed, Betsy's remains showed clear signs of mummification. This meant she had likely been deceased for over a week before anyone discovered her. The realization hit the investigators hard. Had Gene Hackman been living alone in the house for several days, unaware of his wife's death, before meeting his own sudden fate? The very thought seemed unfathomable. What had transpired in the house during those missing days? The layout of the home provided no further clarity. Gene Hackman had been found near the mudroom, while Betsy had been discovered in the bathroom. There was no indication that Gene had attempted to call for help. No frantic 911 call, no messages, nothing. It was as if he had gone through the motions of his day, not realizing the extent of his wife's condition. Had the stress of losing her overwhelmed him, leading to his own sudden collapse? Or had some other, more sinister force been at play? Tim Hackman's plea for patience. Amidst the swirling speculation and rumors, Tim Hackman, Gene's nephew, made a public statement. His message was one of calm and reason in the midst of the chaos. He urged the public to refrain from jumping to conclusions until the official toxicology reports were released. He acknowledged the grief and confusion surrounding the deaths, but emphasized the need for patience in the face of such tragedy. Tim Hackman addressed the media directly, requesting that the public allow the investigative process to unfold without interference. He implored the media to stop spreading misinformation, stressing that premature assumptions would only add to the pain of the family. The Hackman family was still processing their grief, and Tim was frustrated by the rampant speculation that clouded the investigation. False narratives and sensational headlines, he pointed out, did nothing to uncover the truth. Instead, they created confusion and added unnecessary distress to a family already in mourning. He asked that the media respect the privacy of the family during this difficult time. The family, Tim emphasized, was committed to uncovering the truth. But they needed time. Time to wait for the official reports. Time to ensure that all the necessary facts were gathered before any definitive statements were made. Tim Hackman concluded by reassuring the public that once all the necessary information was available, the family would share it with the world. Until then, he pleaded for respect and understanding, hoping that the media and the public would allow his family to grieve without the added burden of constant scrutiny. Law enforcement responds, analyzing the scene and searching for clues. Within minutes, the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department arrived at the scene. The sirens shattered the morning's quiet as they cut through the peaceful streets, alerting the neighbors and sending shockwaves of curiosity through the community. As the deputies entered the home, the full scope of the tragedy began to set in. There were no signs of a struggle, no forced entry into the house, and no immediate indications of foul play. The house remained undisturbed, with no overturned furniture or broken glass to suggest any kind of violent event. The investigators were left with a hauntingly still scene. They carefully examined the bodies of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa for any visible signs of injury, but there was nothing to explain their deaths. Both appeared to have passed peacefully, yet there was no clear explanation for what had happened. The only living creatures in the house were the two surviving dogs, Baron and Nikita. The dogs were visibly shaken, but they had managed to survive whatever had unfolded inside the home. The authorities could only piece together the available evidence. They noted that the bodies of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were in different locations within the house, but both appeared to have died from natural causes. Gene's body had recently collapsed in the foyer, while Betsy's body, discovered in the bathroom, showed signs of mummification, indicating that she had likely passed away days before Gene. The realization that Betsy may have died days before Gene sent shockwaves through the investigation. Had Gene survived for days in the house, completely unaware that his wife had passed away? Was he in a state of shock or confusion, moving through the house in a fog of grief? This was just one of the many questions investigators would have to answer. Forensic investigations, digging for clues, and unraveling the mystery. As investigators delved deeper into the case, the importance of forensic analysis became clear. One of the first items collected from the scene was an orange prescription bottle found near Betsy Arakawa's body. The bottle, which appeared to have spilled onto the floor, held a prescription medication. This raised questions about the role that medications might have played in the deaths of the couple. Was the medication a contributing factor? Could it have been an accidental overdose? Or was there something more sinister at play? Along with the prescription bottle, authorities recovered 2 green cell phones, one belonging to Gene Hackman and the other to Betsy Arakawa. These seemingly innocuous devices held the potential to unlock crucial details about the couple's final days. Former FBI investigator Bill Daley explained that in modern investigations, digital evidence, especially data from cell phones, can be invaluable. Cell phones often act as an undisputed timeline, recording the last movements and actions of an individual. The investigators were determined to examine these cell phones thoroughly. They would analyze the last known activity on the devices, including call logs, text messages, and app usage. This would help establish the couple's last communications and provide insight into whether either Gene or Betsy had reached out for help or tried to communicate with others before their deaths. In addition to simple tracking, forensic experts could also use geolocation data from the phones to map the couple's movements around their home. By tracking the pings from cell towers, they could determine if anyone had been near the house in the days leading up to the deaths. In addition to the digital evidence, toxicology reports became a critical part of the investigation. The initial findings ruled out carbon monoxide poisoning, which had been one of the initial concerns. However, investigators were not ready to dismiss the possibility of other causes of death, including the potential for poisoning or undiagnosed health conditions. Toxicology reports would be crucial in determining whether any substances played a role in their deaths. Until those reports were completed, investigators had to rely on the physical evidence collected from the scene. Another significant clue that surfaced during the investigation was the data from Gene Hackman's pacemaker. The pacemaker, which had been implanted to regulate his heart, recorded its last activity on February 17th, 9 days before the bodies were discovered. This piece of information provided law enforcement with a more precise timeline. If Gene's heart had stopped functioning on February 17th, it raised the question of when Betsy had passed. Had she died at the same time, or had she survived for several days after her husband's death? If Betsy had lived for days after Gene's passing, what had happened during those days? Was she aware of her husband's condition? Did she try to seek help? These questions deepened the mystery. Was there a possibility that the couple had passed away from natural causes, such as a heart attack, stroke, or other medical event? Or was there something more at play, something sinister that had yet to be uncovered? The autopsy and toxicology reports, awaiting answers. As the investigation continued, the authorities were still awaiting the results of the autopsy and toxicology reports, which would hopefully provide some clarity on the causes of death. Preliminary autopsy findings showed that neither Gene nor Betsy had any visible signs of external trauma, which initially suggested that the couple had not been victims of a violent crime. However, experts were still cautious about jumping to conclusions, emphasizing that the case remained open and that more tests were needed to fully understand what had happened. The idea of a companion tragedy, where one partner dies and the other follows voluntarily, had been suggested as a possible explanation for the deaths. However, forensic experts were beginning to doubt this theory. The lack of physical evidence to support this scenario, combined with the strange circumstances surrounding the deaths, made it less likely that the couple had planned to die together. Despite the absence of signs of foul play, authorities remained open to all possibilities, including the potential for accidental poisoning or undiagnosed health conditions. As the public and media eagerly awaited more information, speculation ran rampant. Fans and social media users began to share their theories, with some suggesting that there was foul play involved. Others questioned whether the couple's age or health issues had played a role. Despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear. The deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa had left a void in the world, and the investigation was far from over. Public speculation and the family's plea for patience. As the investigation unfolded, speculation surrounding the deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa reached a fever pitch. The public's desire for answers was understandable, but as rumors swirled, the Hackman family issued a plea for patience. Gene's nephew, Tim Hackman, addressed the media, urging the public to refrain from making baseless assumptions about the deaths until the official reports were completed. Tim expressed his frustration with the misinformation that had been circulating online and in the media. He emphasized that the family was still processing their grief and awaited factual information, not wild speculation. He reminded the public that the authorities were doing everything they could to uncover the truth, and that patience was key in ensuring the accuracy of the investigation. The family also asked for privacy during this difficult time as they navigated the complex emotions of loss, while awaiting the answers that might never come. It was clear that they did not want their grief to be overshadowed by sensationalized headlines or false narratives. Instead, they hoped that the world would remember Gene and Betsy for the lives they had lived, rather than the tragic circumstances of their deaths. Conclusion: the search for answers continues. As of now, the deaths of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa remain shrouded in mystery. While forensic analysis, digital evidence, and toxicology reports are being carefully examined, the case continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Whether the investigation reveals a tragic but natural ending or uncovers something more sinister, the world remains transfixed by the mystery surrounding the couple's untimely demise. What happened in that peaceful Santa Fe home? Was it simply a coincidence, a natural tragedy that took two beloved lives? Or is there something more to the story? Something hidden beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered? Only time will tell. But for now, the world watches, waiting for the truth to emerge.